Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another WoW Classic video. My name is Kargoz. Thank you for joining me today. We're going to be reacting to the newest Mad Season video, hot off the press, 2 hours ago, entitled, When Classic WoW Really Died. 14 minutes long. We're going to lock in and enjoy this and watch it for the first time together. So, here we go. Right off the rip, Wrath of the Lich King here. That wasn't what I was expecting as well. There's Wrath of the Lich King. It looks red. It looks like it's up in flames. Does this mean Wrath of the Lich King killed Vanilla? The video is called When Classic WoW Really Died, but this first thumbnail is what really killed Vanilla. We'll see.
Hey guys, what's up? Mad Season here, back with another video for you. When people talk about World of Warcraft, they're usually discussing one of two versions, current or classic, or vanilla as it's called, and that's because they're wildly distinct. Where one has the identity of old school RPG elements, wonky imbalance, community, a lack of microtransactions, or just weird annoying things like filling your bags with useless quest items that you hold onto for 3 years until you realize you don't need it anymore. Whereas the other has a more modernized, streamlined, and goal-oriented flavor where you can buy all forms of character progression. Though they are technically the same game, they're so wildly different from one another if they didn't share the same name.
My god, what even is that, bro? Like, just is it just me? Am I just boomed out of my mind? Like, I just look at all this and it just looks so like corny to me. I know here goes Kargoz on the retail rant again, but just like look at it, bro. It's so goofy. It's like Disney, Pixar, Moana, like scaly, furry. I insert whatever you want to say about it. I mean, even just like flashing the two games next to each other, even though it's just a tiny little snapshot. I mean, just like the color palette and everything.
Filling your bags with useless quest items that you hold onto for 3 years until you realize you don't need it anymore. Whereas the other has a more modernized, streamlined,
How to Meet Your Dragon MMORPG
flavor where
How to Tame a Dragon,
all forms of character progression.
Raid ready 424 gear. I'm so lost in the sauce with retail. I didn't even know you could do this. You can buy a previous character on retail, up to 20 renown with 5 major Dragonflight factions. First 5 dragon riding mounts unlocked. 30 slot bags. You literally just buy like a turnkey character ready to raid. Like, retail to me, if this is true, is like, it's literally the opposite of the fresh mentality. It's the opposite of wanting to go again, deleting, starting anew. It's like,
though they are technically the same game, they're so wildly different from one another. If they didn't share the same name, it would be hard to tell that what you're playing in 2024.
I'm sorry, I'm getting hung up. But look at that on the right.
Playing in 2024 is the culmination of thousands of changes from its original launch in 2004. The game is where it's at today due to 2 decades of changes, but there have been certain expansions that many feel are more drastic than others in this regard, and for the past 20 years, the expansion that many thought to truly divide this classic era and modern is the Cataclysm, and it's for good reason. It changed the world of Azeroth as we knew it, literally. The old world was completely redone, talents were restricted heavily, you can no longer mix and match, only fire mages could use Fireball for instance. Weapon speeds were normalized, automated group finding for raids were added, and countless RPG elements were flat out removed. It was clear at this point that the design philosophy had shifted, but my argument for this video is that this isn't where this philosophy began, but merely where it accelerated, and its true origins can be found in none other than the Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Wrath today is looked upon with great fondness, and rightfully so. It was a great...
I promise you guys, I'm telling you the complete God's honest truth here, but who was playing Wrath of the Lich King back in the day? I was a senior in high school when it came out. It might have been a junior. I'm pretty sure I was a senior. It might have been a junior, though. I remember studying the Grizzly Hills music for my SATs, but I think you can take the SATs again as a senior. Anyway, I played Wrath back in the day, and I was having fun, but already at the time, I was sort of feeling like the game was on the decline, and it was a pretty like widespread feeling at the time that like they were retailifying the game. Like, we didn't even have that term because that was just the retail, but Like, people were starting to make all those arguments, like the game is becoming way too homogenous and blah 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 blah. And that was a very real feeling back during real Wrath of the Lich King. And I learned later that Wrath was when WoW peaked, and that people were just absolutely loving Wrath. But I remember actually being a little bit of a doomer about Wrath towards the end of it, when it was out in and of itself. So here's what he has to say.
Whether it be the Death Knight class, the zones, dungeons, raids, or back when the lore was actually good, instead of just watching Sylvanas body every single lore character in the game.
He really had to put the Hadouken in there? Oh, that's funny, dude.
Under the service of a Thanos ripoff, rife with self-inserts. Speaking of good lore, I do want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this video. Out of my 10 years...
We're not going to mess it up this time. I have realized now that when you do React content and someone has a sponsor in their video, you actually have to watch it. I didn't even think about it the first time, but let's watch
on
it.
YouTube,
I'm ready to consume.
Too many sponsors, I think it's
I'm
fair
ready
to
to
say.
consume. Sign me
I
up.
only do stuff that I use or I
Ooh.
think is cool. And if you're looking to get into a really cool series, I only do stuff that I use.
Is that a mouse pad? Why is that shaped like a mouse pad? Dude, I'm not gonna lie, that looks like a functional mouse pad.
And if you're looking to get into a really cool series, this gets my recommendation for sure. Michael R. Miller is the author of The Songs of Chaos. Being a classic Andy himself.
Whoa, he got a sponsorship from a book? Like a book series? This is wild. This is not like Hello Fresh. This is not Raid Shadow Legends. He got a straight up like fantasy book series.
Recently got my hands on the series, which has been a real treat. Some things are actually inspired from classic if you have a keen eye, such as the main character using consecration. Must be holy spec, which is pretty in line with vanilla, I suppose. But to give you a general idea of the series, if you've ever...
I remember reading this book back when I was in school. It was like mandatory. I guess it was middle school or something, Aragon, yeah.
Read Aragon by Christopher Paolini as a kid. This will be right up your alley. It follows the story of two misfits. Holt Cook, who's a servant boy who rebels against society to rescue a blind dragon from certain death, and becoming a dragon rider in the process, and confronting an undead menace, and unearth secrets that reshape their reality. It's an ongoing series. Currently there are 3 installments: Ascendant, Unbound, and...
Yo, be honest, guys. When's the last time you read a paperback book? A paperback book. You sat down on the couch with a physical book and read it.
Defiant, the latter being released just last year to great reception. You can get the series in ebooks and in print. I actually have the hardbacks myself, but I'm more of an audiobook person, and I've been having this playing while leveling in Classic, which has been like the most relaxing thing ever, so I'd highly suggest checking out the audiobooks on Audible. They're all narrated by Peter Kenny, whom you may recognize if you listened to the Witcher series.
Yo, so far, no ads, guys.
Ascendant is available for 1 credit on
No
Audible,
ads so far.
and it runs for 18 hours. In total, the whole series is over 67 hours. But yeah, I just really like the series, and I'm happy to do a sponsor of it because I do think it'll resonate with a lot of you guys too if you're into this sort of genre. If so, click my link in the description below if it is something that you would like to check out. Back to the video though, going back to Wrath.
That's a cool sponsorship. It's complimentary to making like videos about the classic, high fantasy, it's all that. And the author is actually a classic Andy himself. That's a cool sponsorship. Better than Raid Shadow Legends.
Arthas Menethil is the subject of this expansion, of course. He's now the Lich King, freshly awoken from a long slumber, and players have to revisit the land of Northrend to stop him, bringing many major features along the way, and many that I post to you today don't really fall in line with
New
what
dances,
people define as vanilla,
augers,
but in fact even directly contradict it. So many times people talk about the spirit of vanilla, but what does it actually mean? Some say it's a lengthy leveling campaign. World of Warcraft was developed from 1999 to 2004.
I can tell you what it is. The world is the main character. World is the main character. You have to go out into the world. The overall vibe and feeling is that the world doesn't care about you. It's very unapologetic. It's brutal. There's not a lot of convenience. You feel like a pleb. You feel like a guy with a stick as opposed to like a conqueror of Azeroth. Like all that, dude. It's the spirit of vanilla.
And what many describe as the golden era of MMORPGs.
Whoa, what the heck is this?
and though they all differed in various ways, a time-consuming leveling process
Is that RuneScape?
wasn't one of them. Today, leveling in all MMOs is seen as an obstacle, more of a distraction that's meant to be completed as fast as humanly possible so you can get to the real game, where it all opens up, and you repeat the same dungeons and raids ad nauseum 4,000 times over until you get bored and quit. During this golden era, as it's called, however, in regards to leveling...
Was this RuneScape? Or is this EverQuest? Oh no, that's EverQuest. It's the same thing.
In regards to leveling, the genre was grindy, time-consuming, and challenging, and although Vanilla WoW, comparatively speaking to the rest of the genre at the time, was actually pretty casual, by today's standards, the 1 to 60 journey has become one of its most defining characteristics, to be sure. But, this being the internet, nobody can really agree on anything, and others believe that the spirit of vanilla is the community. This is a time before dungeon or raid finding, cross-server anything. You picked a server, and you could only see, play with, and talk to other players on your server and your server alone. You saw the same names, that really good guild, that big PvP group. The guy you saw getting bodied by device pillagers at level 14 is now level 60, clearing through the Blackwing lair.
You're gonna have 3 pillagers on you, by the way.
Yeah. Yep. And combining all of this with social media's lack of evolution at the time, and thus most interaction happening in-game or on Realm forums instead of Discords, the game had, and still has today to a lesser extent, a very community-oriented feeling. Other people say that the spirit of vanilla is innocence and lack of goals. This one is tricky because I think you can chalk the...
Interesting. I've never heard that before, ever. Lack of goals is the spirit of vanilla. I see what he means by that, but you can have goals in vanilla. But I guess what he means is like the idea that most players in the context of the time were just having fun in the sandbox exploring, and people didn't really like feel compelled to, you know, reach max level and raid and stuff, because I honestly didn't even know any better. Like the game was just like crazy huge back then and people didn't know everything.
Design, but also inexperience, and with the game being linear, it always has been goal-oriented to some degree. But vanilla represents the era before achievements, where you could just explore a corner of the world, not for internet points, but more for just the sake of doing it. Some say that the spirit of vanilla is the lack of features, or its simplicity. It was before the game had become very bloated with features, as every MMO...
I just thought of something, I'm gonna forget it unless I say it right now. But there is something to be said. It's the same thing that you're doing, right? Like, okay, you fully explore a zone on your own terms versus you fully explore a zone and you get an achievement. The experience is different. In vanilla, it does feel like maybe I found something kind of secret, or like I wonder if people know about this. If you explore something or do something and like there's an automated achievement that pops up and congratulates you, it feels like it was never a secret to begin with, right? It doesn't feel like a real mystery of Azeroth. It feels like, oh, this was like a script. This is just part of the intended content. This is what I was intended to do. You know, if you collect a pet or if you get a mount or whatever it is, or like just vanilla WoW just felt like very, like the game didn't care about you. The world didn't even have all the answers about the world. It felt very like feral and yeah, like it wasn't scripted, the whole content in vanilla. There was no script.
One of these things are microtransactions, as it was released during a time before developers found out how lucrative paid progression could be in this addictive genre centered around character progression, and others say that it was super hardcore, which is funny by today's standards, but back in 04 to 07 skill level, having only one raid difficulty was unforgiving. There is no easier mode to run to if you're wiping to a boss to see a raid in its entirety, nor was it widely available on YouTube, because YouTube didn't exist, and really, the only way to see it was to get good. And it goes on and on. No one can really agree what truly defines vanilla WoW. Maybe it's a culmination of all of this, but getting to the point of this video, what if I were to tell you that everything I just listed disappeared not with the Cataclysm, but the beloved Wrath of the Lich King? Though this was during an era before you could just swipe a credit card to straight up buy levels and gold directly from...
I believe it, but I still also think Cataclysm was an additional, like, big, like, cataclysmic event. Like, Wrath, he's right, like, it started in Wrath, but Cata was really when the Band-Aid was, like, fully ripped off. The world just got completely upended. Everything you know and love about the old world, the classes, everything, it's, like, almost completely unrecognizable at that point.
Told you so, by the way. Leveling was severely nerfed.
Whoa, he just threw that token in there. It's true though. It's true. How did Blizzard do it? How did they convince the majority of classic players that Kata is okay? We're cool with Kata now. I've said it a million times on stream. Imagine cast your memory back to 2019 when all of this started. And what we would have said back then if Blizzard said, "So you guys interested in classic Cataclysm someday?" What would we have said back then? I mean, it's like hilarious, right? We've had paid character boosts in TBC, no fresh servers TBC. We have WoW token in the game that started in Wrath. I didn't know that. I thought it was in Kata. They just slipped it in there because they're like, the player base is so different now. They're playing Kata Classic. Like, they'll be cool with it. They're kind of retail players anyway. But apparently they put that in Wrath, which I didn't know.
Directly from Blizzard. Told you so, by the way. Leveling was severely nerfed in
You can tell he's salty
ways.
about the token.
There was an XP reduction that came in the Burning Crusade, but as far as Wrath is concerned, you may remember was also when they added heirlooms, which increased XP gains by 25% total if you were to collect every piece, as well as making the leveling process drastically easier. It was also Wrath when they added XP to Battlegrounds, and also the introductory experience was made far easier by buffing classes and regeneration rate. Regardless, it was clear. Blizzard at this point had started to shift their design philosophy.
It's true. You were a main character in Wrath of the Lich King. It's true. I played Wrath of the Lich King fresh, Sky Fury. Remember, guys? How much stronger you were, and you don't even really know why, but the world already felt like really cheap. You were playing Dynasty Warriors at that point already. It felt like that. Where in vanilla, the mobs really, like, if you're just going through the normal progression, they feel punishing. The way the damage pans out, and you can definitely just make a little mistake, pull one mob extra or something, and you totally can die, right? The damage sits heavy on you. In Wrath, you're just cleaving everything down.
End game at the expense of leveling, because that's where the game truly begins, right? That's where you see these awesome raids and you get the shiny loot and you finish your character so you can earn the luxury of not having to play anymore. Today, it's an extreme. The game has 10 expansions, but you can level from 1 to max in the span of a day, or seconds, depending on how much you value your time versus your money. Speaking of which, Wrath was also when we saw the introduction of major microtransactions. It was also 2008 was when Blizzard's parent company, Vivendi, merged with the Sith of the gaming industry.
Yes, you guys remember that during Wrath of the Lich King. That happened, and already some of the same mentality people have these days was happening back then, where people were already like dooming on Blizzard back during original Wrath. It was similar towards like how people, some people are disgruntled at Blizzard now with Classic. That was happening like big time back then. When this acquisition happened, it was like the talk of the town, like, oh, Blizzard's all downhill from here, blah, blah, blah.
We all know how this turns out. Shortly after, the game would see more microtransactions through the form of race changes, faction changes, cosmetic pets.
For the record, though, do you guys like Wrath of the Lich King overall, or do you see it as like a detriment to the franchise? Where I stand on it is I do have some love in my heart for Wrath. But I've broken it down before. Like it's like a pie chart for me. If my like heart was a pie chart and invested in different versions of the game, 75% would be vanilla, something like 20% would be TBC, and like 5% would be Wrath. There's a place there for me. Like the music, the zones, they're a bit nostalgic for me. I remember where I was, the time and place in my life, playing with my roommates, and I was there for the entirety of Wrath, playing all the raid tiers and stuff. But I also acknowledge it, like, which is pretty much Mad Season's point with this video, is that it was the beginning of the end.
These were relatively minor compared to today's standards. It's undeniable that Wrath marked the beginnings of the very anti-vanilla microtransaction culture. Many also recall that Wrath was the first instance of widely used group finding through the Dungeon Finder system, introduced in patch 3.3, where with a click of a button, players would match up with other queued players and were directly teleported to the dungeon. Though on its release, it would be received with widespread acclaim, over the years, its negative effects have become quite apparent, particularly its effect on the aforementioned community. As mentioned earlier, the passage of time and increased familiarity with the game has done a lot to wear away at the social fabric, but still, and you wouldn't really think of it, but the process of forming a group, traveling to a dungeon, and giving direction and engaging in small talk turned out to be quite an effective way to create the spark that would fuel friendships that lasted decades. Or perhaps a situation where you're grouping with a guildless player who does high DPS. If they're on another server entirely, you no longer get these natural opportunities to meet and play with.
There's whole other issues too. Like with this system, people become expendable. You don't care about the people in your dungeons. People are way more likely to be a dick to each other and treat each other very poorly and be very savage, right? And be very brutal. Because you can just replace someone in 2 seconds, and it just requires you and 2 of your homies to just, you know, right-click, remove this guy, and then you replace him in 1 second. So those community vibes are kind of dead, like what he's saying. I mean, it's what I say now about a lot of the versions of the game as well, where, you know, the 1x leveling, the world feeling big, it's like a hurt so good pain. Like the world, it makes all the, you know, the wins that you do get feel so much better because of the pacing and because how unfun the game can be at times.
Your server. This would of course accelerate with the addition of the LFR mode in Cataclysm, where guilds weren't even required to see endgame content anymore. But again, this is a design philosophy that began in Wrath. Speaking of raiding, a point mentioned earlier was that throughout Vanilla and the Burning Crusade, an unforgiving element was the fact that there was just one difficulty. No LFR, no normal mode, and it was balanced accordingly. I remember when the Blackwing Lair came out, half of the raiding guilds got Thanos'd because people ran into a fight that wasn't just a reskinned salamander. It actually required coordination, execution, and the rare hunters who didn't play as if they were controlling their character with a DDR pad. This brick wall immediately zoning into the raid filtered out the unworthy, and there was no recourse. Different difficulty modes were experimented with quite a bit in Wrath. At first in Extramus, there were achievements that gave cosmetic rewards for imposing tricky challenges upon yourself, and later in Old War, there would be hard modes that gave more loot, such as leaving the towers up on Flame Leviathan, or pushing the big red button on Mimeron, to name just a few. But when the Trial of the Crusader came out, it came with a landmark change that would shape the entire future of the raiding scene as we knew it, and that's heroic difficulty. In this mode, the bosses would have increased health, damage, and sometimes mechanics, and as a reward...
I struggle thinking about Wrath though with one difficulty. I feel like it's so baked into the game. Would it truly be better if all these raids just had one difficulty? Maybe so, but I just can't even visualize it. I feel like it's so baked into it. The idea that you have like these challenges you can do, start there in 3 Drake, you do the hard modes
more
on
powerful
World of
loot.
War.
In exchange, however, the difficulty of normal mode would be scaled down to make raiding more accessible to the populace, and encouraging those seeking greater challenges to this heroic mode. Although, again, LFR was in Cataclysm, which was equally huge. It was Wrath was when this design philosophy of more accessible raiding took shape. So, heirlooms, microtransactions, multiple raid difficulties, more accessible raiding, group finders, a big shift towards goal-oriented design, and more. Wrath was a great expansion, don't get me wrong. I mean, there's a reason why it was then that the game reached peak subscribers, and I look back to it quite fondly myself. This isn't me saying that any of this is bad, but more of just me saying that these are all features that most would tie to the identity of current World of Warcraft, not vanilla. So while Cataclysm did the same in many big ways, it was Wrath was when it all started. Cataclysm was when they just put their foot on the gas to accelerate the game into this very new and very different era. Like the video if you liked it, because I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
That was a really good video. I don't know if I had any amazing takes or anything on it, but that was a fun one. Season is a Giga Chad. Editing, the music, all of it. Probably know who Mad Season is. He's a way bigger creator than me, but if you don't, I'm gonna leave a link to the video down below in the description. And that's that. When Classic WoW really died. So I guess his point is Classic WoW started declining, or losing the spirit of vanilla rather in Wrath, not Cataclysm, which I agree with. I remember feeling that way back in the day, but I don't know. I see why Blizzard did Classic Cata. I feel like everybody can see why they did it. You're telling a company, a for-profit company that's publicly traded, right, to take a huge L for no reason. There's so much money left on the table if they just cut it off at Wrath, and that was Classic, even though it makes sense. I get it. Like it's almost like their hands are tied to do Cataclysm and beyond. But it doesn't make sense to me, and I do wish that Classic was just the trilogy. I'd have a lot more pride just talking about Classic in general and being a Classic gamer. If it was just like that, and they maybe iterated in all 3 versions, had era for all 3 versions, like seasonal fresh, all that type of stuff. Yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Comment, rate, subscribe if you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one.